Good morning, everyone. I went to bed with anxiety and I am now up early. Joy. Interesting to see how that's an adaptive coping mechanism. I'm currently just taking time to do self-comfort by eating some ice cream straight out of the bin. Not because it's good for me, but rather because it's comfort food. I don't like relying on comfort food too much, though. Hope you're all doing okay. I was kind of in a low energy, depressive mood last night on recording. Managed to keep it together, but probably didn't sound all that great. Hmm. Um, hey, a whole web. But of course. Yeah, no, the one with the flower pins at the start of the video is named Celestia V1. It's not a base model, Abby. It's one that was custom made by someone. Trust me, if I could go find it out on Booth and download it myself, pay for it, fucking I hella would. Uh, uh, oh, this is going to be a lot more of me just sitting around and being quiet until something pops up that I want to talk about than it is me actively bringing something to the table. Uh, Noted. Oh, it's not showing up. Interesting. But yeah, this is the video that left me in an interesting conflict with myself last night between doubt and fear. Because it brings up a character that's not purely the traditional idea of psychopathic, but instead empathetically absent. Oh. Oh. Yeah, I would agree. That is a villain main character done well.
Isekai
If
villains
it's who I
suck.
think
For a genre where the whole point is being transported to fun and interesting worlds, you think that the villains in those worlds would be just as interesting, but they lack everything that makes a villain interesting: an ideology, motivation, basic goals, a brain.
Yes, the overly efficient motherfucker who completely fumbles social conversations and dynamics so much that he ends up getting pushed off the rails while waiting for a subway by the man he just recently fired. Reincarnates as a little girl only to become the devil of fucking war. Yeah, it's the manga anime and the character I thought it was. Anyways, no, this video talking about Bondrude really messed with me because what he subjects other people to, I technically need subject myself to instead. But maybe that's a inaccurate parallel, and more of a toxic shame is skewing my perspective. Because on a personal end, I know I have empathy, I know I have feelings, and I care about the impacts of my actions. Meanwhile, this motherfucker is so disassociated from empathy that he's misconstrued the impacts of his actions under one entire label. That really shows how disproportionately and distortedly distant he is from understanding others' feelings. He is not inherently malicious, he is just inherently ignorant of empathy, despite every chance to learn about it along the way. He's internalized it as a different variable rather than a dynamic concept. And last night I was too tired to draw that line between me and him. Because I don't want to subject others to the same shit that he does. I've got to experiment. I'll experiment on my own psychological structure first. After all, I can survive it and live with the results. Other people, not so much. So, where would I fit in then? Because I'm definitely eldritch, weird, and unhinged in some regards. But I'm not him, and I'm glad I'm not him. I once saw a Reddit post about someone who had all of the traits of a psychopath and a narcissist, but there was one key difference. They didn't blame others for their own. They didn't blame others for falling short or for failures in their life. They blamed themselves more than anything. And I connected to that and I resonated with it, but I haven't been able to find it since. Where there's the traditional traits of something toxic inherent, but one key difference redirects all the outwardly destructive things inward instead. Where it's like, I didn't do good enough. I didn't. Ah. So, what is that? Because if one key difference results in a switch from external impact on other people's lives to containing it within oneself and only impacting your own life, then doesn't that mean it's a major definition change? It's a high contrast. So what is it? What in the world would it be? I'm not sure. Conditions of narcissism, but I don't. Sociopathy, narcissism, or psychopathy? Which one was it? Is it instead of shifting blame to others, I shift all blame onto my own shortcomings instead? And how close does that put me in terms of relation in relativity to an enabler? All right. What's what's opposite of an enabler and abuser? Hair. That's a very short-sighted summary of it. That doesn't give me a word to use, though. So let's try thinking up our own. Financial support, emotional validation, or even physical protection. Misguided sense of love and responsibility. That's not a holistic summary of a nurturer. That's a one-sided summary of a nurturer. Because a nurturer doesn't just a nurturer isn't just the safety and environment they provide. That's like the big part of that most people recognize, but a subtler aspect would probably be in how nurturers also help communicate healthy boundary lines and hold people accountable without necessarily shaming them. Reinforcing negative patterns and preventing individuals from facing and addressing their issues. Depends on what you're looking for, on if you're on if you're planning on brain. Take a moment. It depends on if you're looking for an inherent reward or not. If you get something out of it, or if you're just doing it because you know you can't stand beside it and wait for things to play out. Because that last definition is what I think is traditionally thought of as the hero, is someone who doesn't just stand aside and wait for things to play out, but jumps in and tries to help someone else, even if they don't always know what they're doing or they're putting themselves at risk in order to help another. I think that's what a hero is, and I think that's what we've seen gently and subtly reinforced time and again throughout fictional history, is that people like Midoriya or otherwise who are willing to just move and try to help someone, even if they themselves may not be powerful, is the traditional definition of a hero. However, heroes can be found in many different aspects because of the different dynamics and situations people find themselves in. Hey, heck, where one person may see a flaw of their own issues, another person could see the safety, comfort, and light that helps them heal within that flaw instead. And it's in those kinds of dynamics that the line between healthy relationships and unhealthy ones gets blurred. I mean, on one hand, that's another tangent to address another time. Let's not get lost in threads. Oh, so holy crap, blindingly bright. I'm turning to ashes. The sun is too much. I'm burning up under the light of the sun. Uh, Now that looks like a reference point into power and control wheel. Alright. So someone's done the same thing. Uh, on some level, there is the historical average of it being a woman's life and circumstances that are taken control of. But and this isn't the idea of erasing. This is the idea of acknowledging that there are other people who have also been through this that aren't women. There are people's lives and circumstances who are taken control of. I don't like to think about it. There's definitely a dynamic power in history to whether it's man or girl, but that doesn't mean that men don't end up at that point as well. Yeah. I would say psychological is along the line of this area too. No. That's I'm definitely adding this to key info stuff, primary mental health info. For context and further clarification on what I mean about it, it's not just women, even if they are historically more likely to suffer this kind of stuff because of traditional stereotypes and otherwise. I want to bring this up. Yeah, if he has suffered abuse, take him seriously, please. He needs just as much reassurance, love, and care as any girl who has been hurt. If he flinches when you touch his face, be gentle and tell him that's okay and you love him. If he gets sad or clingy and needs constant affirmation, don't mock him or tease him or become frustrated. He's scared. He needs you. If he doesn't always trust you, it's because he's been lied to before and he's learned that sometimes the words, I'll love you forever, don't mean anything. Show that man he's loved and that he's cared for. Yeah, no, and between the two different pieces right here, I'd like to think of it as just if they have suffered abuse, take them seriously, please. They need just as much as reassurance, love, and care as anyone else who has been hurt. If they flinch when you touch them, be gentle and tell them it's okay and that you love them. If they get sad or clingy and need constant affirmation, don't mock them or tease or become frustrated. They're scared. They need you. If they don't always trust you, it's because they've been lied to before. They've learned that sometimes the words, I'll love you forever, don't mean anything. Show that person they're loved and that they're cared for. You might have to prove to them every day that you're not going to leave them or hurt them. You should never take it as personal anger. It's not about you, and they deserve a relationship that doesn't take advantage of them. That ending part is something I don't quite fully agree with. It's not his fault. That depends on the situation and the person. For those who where the abuse has overwritten their ability to make choices and to kicked out their ability to choose anything different because they've never known anything different, that's where you can just be there for them. And someone who chooses to jump into old habits and relive the past over and over again, that's where you kind of have to draw a line and hold the other person accountable. And the line between those two different parts is very thin because sometimes it's in thinking that there is nothing else and being scared of trying something new that someone else makes the decision to jump back into old habits and patterns and try again. To revisit the past and relive it in hopes that something will change, even if you use the same skill set and dynamics. And that's a nuance I don't know how to address, because if the tender core is protected by a hardened outer shell that is inherently toxic to others, then how are you supposed to address the tender core without getting hurt yourself? That's where I think a large part of keeping a power to keeping the ability to set healthy boundaries for yourself is really important because that then sets an example to the other person about, oh, these are what healthy boundaries look like, and helps them nurture towards that if they're willing to. Meanwhile, the other end of things doesn't do that at all. If anything, it just enables. Because ultimately, you can only nurture so much. If there's no change in the core, there's no change overall. And that's one of the biggest issues facing mental health, safety, and recovery of people from the abyss of psychological issues and otherwise. So I want to try and figure out how to address without sacrificing myself in order to do so. Blinding. The need or pressure or the pain that would inspire them to change. No, personally, in my opinion of myself and everything, I am not a functioning member of society. But I'm working towards becoming one because I don't want to fucking stay like this. And if no one's going to help me do this, then I'm going to do it for myself and leave behind the fragments that help other people do it for themselves instead of relying or waiting on someone to fucking save me. Destructive leadership. Okay, destructive leadership. Now that sounds like something worth learning from, not in a sense of, oh, I want to do it, but more in a sense of, okay, so this is what not to do. Failed verification. Task-oriented decision making. Alright. Type 1 and 3 are the unhealthy variants. Meanwhile, 2 and 4 are probably the healthier, more balanced one. Well, of course not. Because they'd be too focused on addressing the patient's issues and or pointing out flaws to be included in the social circle of a narcissist. And if they choose to try and remain in that social circle, then they run the risk of being corrupted into contributing either through uh, co-conspirators versus conformers. Conformers was what I was looking for. At best, they run the risk of becoming someone who conforms, and at worst, they run the risk of becoming someone who unintentionally becomes a co-conspirator over time through sheer infectious osmosis and corruption. Psychoanalysts usually don't get close enough to these fuckers exactly because they wish to live as themselves, not some hollow shell. A certain kind of charismatic leader can run a financially successful company on thoroughly unhealthy principles for a time. Not indefinitely, just for a short time, enough to make a play or fool. One of the key ways of differentiating a good enough organization from one that is pathological is through its ability to exclude narcissistic characters from key posts. I.e., don't give those who would feast on whose bad habits would be enabled by more power to ever obtain it. Now, that could lead to a Tai Long incident wherein someone is promised power and idealizes it to the point of trying really hard only to not get it or be dismissed because they never learn to tap into their own empathy. And that, in and of itself, is a complicated dynamic that also deserves to be explored as its own tangent in order to resolve things from multiple different angles instead of just one. Because if you only resolve things from one angle, then you're not addressing the whole of it. You're just addressing a facet. Ah, in line with reality. We enjoy power versus being addicted to it. Okay, so this takes the idea of concepts and dynamically considers, hey, can we use these ideas as part of our support network when we cannot call upon living people or dynamically interactive people? Unfortunately, you lose out on the dynamicism of that risk reward, so I don't quite agree with you, but I can understand your decision. Because at that rate, you're running the risk of disconnecting from reality and how people actually live by by surrounding yourself by ideas, concepts, and non-dynamic creatures only. This can also be used to unintentionally create a cult-like fanaticism towards a concept, which can have a backfiring that creates opposites impacts. If you can keep it up to positive impacts and make sure you do not lose yourself within the concept of something else, let alone another person, then that's good. If it crosses that line, that's where you need to take a step back and realize, hey, this is a concept, not a wholly consuming part of reality. Yeah, no, symbolism and parallels are useful tools. They're just not end-all be-alls. And one should not seek to lose themselves within symbolism, but rather to take notice of the symbolism that is already present within their mind, so that way they may call upon it as needed to help influence their decision making in ways that encourage growth and healing. Another thing I realized the other day when I was just hanging out with some of my friends, and this is a tangent, but it's semi-related, is that that's that's not my scene anymore. That's not my emotional and social home anymore. It used to be. Used to be able to call hanging out with those scoobers a kind of social and emotional home, but it's not anymore. Because fantasy's dead. Fantasy's dead, and I'm not reviving it. It's not a space I want to live in. It's just a space I want to visit for the people I care, for the people I care about who are still within. It hurts to say that, it hurts to acknowledge it, it hurts to admit it, that that social space isn't home anymore. Because that just means it's another stopping point amongst other stopping points. Another memory and piece of history rather than a place I can finally call home for longer than a year. A place I can finally call a social home for longer than a year. Or two. Ah. The enabler might be afraid of the abuser, want to stay in their good graces, or are trying to protect themselves in any way they can. There is usually a main enabler who will blame others for the narcissist's bad behavior. Hey! Other players in the systems may take on the role of flying monkeys who carry out the needs and wants of the narco so everyone stays in line. This insecurity gets projected onto the other family members. Noted. The scapegoat and the truth teller are mixed in this description. They're not always the same person. Or feeling too nervous to set boundaries. That's, I think, the main thing I was frustrated with the most. Is that although that dense stork was willing to set polite boundaries, they weren't willing to draw heavy lines beyond that polite space. And that's why I worried about with the in that regard. If they couldn't draw heavy lines when they needed those lines for not just themselves, but also someone else they cared about, then they were at risk of ending up subtly abused. Sure, embracing conflict isn't always a healthy thing. How it can lead to, as something else I was shown the other day by my mom, when you embrace the fight system of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, you can end up leaning towards narcissistic things. But it's by balancing the four different parts of it out that you get closer to being a healthy person and having each overexpression dialed down to a healthy level. Yeah, however, an enabler can be associated with any person who supports harmful behavior. It makes it easier for the person to continue their behaviors. And I know it wasn't the biggest thing. I know it wasn't the end of the world. But that dense stork's ability to confront me using their own feelings is ultimately the very thing that made me walk away. Beyond it just the polite end. And I guess that's probably because they weren't in a place to go there, because they didn't see that value in me, even though I saw that value in them. And so that was just me putting my attention and care in some place where it wasn't wanted or needed. I've got to accept that. It's not just that I've got to accept that or that I have to. It's that I want to and I get to accept that. Because if I don't, then I'm just going to be stuck. And I'm not going to be here for myself. Enabling doesn't mean that a person thinks the behaviors of the other person are okay. That's like the deepest end of enabling. But they might tolerate them because they don't know how to better handle the situation. And that's like the earliest form of enabling. It can be done in healthy ways for small doses, but if it grows beyond that, it starts becoming very unhealthy. An enabler does things that the person should be able to do for themselves. And if someone doesn't know how, an enabler just covers that up. Meanwhile, a helper tries to teach that person about how they can do it for themselves, either through setting an example or by gently poking towards resources that the other person could look into on their own time. Yeah, no, if you shield someone from the pain of their own choices and actions, you disconnect them from the reality of their impact and set them up to fail in terms of their own growth. And it's that little difference that is the most subtle, annoying, and nuanced part of actually being there for, with, alongside, and even sometimes against someone. Yeah. Where the enabler feels that they cannot stop enabling the person they love without feeling that they abandoned them in their time of need. Sometimes this isn't a one-way street. Sometimes two people can enable different qualities in each other while also being abusive to the other in those qualities without recognizing it. Ugh. If you don't let everything fall apart, you'll never get to see if the person is willing to change. And so you keep yourself trapped in a fantasy. Unintentionally supports harmful behavior by shielding a person from the consequences of their actions. For me, I saw that the dense stork, at least from my perspective, it may not have looked like it from their perspective. But from my perspective, they were unintentionally supporting the insecure part of myself in expressing her desires over and over again without understanding how much that poking and prodding hurt by staying quiet. And I I couldn't accept watching that. How am I supposed to? I try giving my heart out to someone, the seed and core of who I started from out into another person's hands, partially by accident, let's be real here. And I watch it start to. I watch them start to abandon their own seed and core in order to stay silent, and I'm not okay with that. I was never okay with it. I just wasn't in a place to keep it from happening. Because I thought the other person was ready for such a responsibility, and that was a misjudgment on my part. It was partly out of convenience, partly because I wanted to have a hope that I would be proven wrong, that they would actually live up to being responsible with it to the degree that was needed. But the reality is, I misjudged. I placed my heart, I tripped, found my heart in the hands of someone who I very much cared for but could not trust, and hesitated on making my decision in the hopes that they would prove me wrong. And in the end, it hurt not just me, but the people around me too, especially them. How am I supposed to live with that? How am I supposed to live with that? How am I supposed to live with the fact that I misjudged where other people were at and got not only myself, but other people hurt too? Because in my first big mess, I misjudged where I was at and thought myself ready to handle responsibility in that way. And in this second biggest mistake of my life, I misjudged where someone else was at, gave them too much responsibility that they weren't ready for, or that they hadn't even earned or asked for yet. And in both cases, the majority, if not the entirety of the mistake is on my end, my responsibility to deal with, because I'm the one who made that judgment call. At least that's how my mind plays it on loop to me. I know that's not the full truth of things, but it's the perspective I'm stuck with until something or someone changes. I don't even allow myself to cry because then I have to sniffle and blow my nose and all that. It's like I should be allowing myself to sit with this feeling of grief. But of course, because part of me is so practical minded, it just doesn't. It lets it come close. It lets it sit like 5 feet away from me. But it doesn't let it sit next to me. And I don't like that. I don't like how self controlling I am. Because when I was a kid, I fell for the illusion of control. But then I realized, oh, you can't control others. So I then tried to control only myself. And now I'm running up against the limitations of that. and them trying to fight past the misconceptions I had accepted early on in my life. And it's a struggle, it's a grief, it's a healing process that doesn't have a singular endpoint. In a way, by staying silent during that situation, letting things play out as long as I did, I was technically also shielding the other person from the impacts of their choices and actions. It was a double deficit. Yep. No, I would agree. Overly compassionate, conflict adverse, self sacrificing, overly responsible, highly loyal, optimistic to a fault, people pleasing, fearful of rejection, and overprotective. Yeah. No. I can recognize these traits because I originated from that space and I'm still trying my best to crawl out of it. To fight, to struggle, to wait, to evade, and to be brutally honest enough to the point where, hey, not brutally honest, constructively honest enough to where I don't live entirely in the survival mode. Very people I think of as cute and adorable are the very people that need to be, that are likely to be unintentional enablers. And that's the reason why I want to be there, beyond just my own issues, so that way they can heal and grow and become closer to being healthy people instead of running the risk of getting taken advantage of. If abusers are the source of power in the machine, then enablers are the cogs between that put that power into action. Nice to see their videos. I don't really watch too many of them, but I know I see them around enough to in this space to know that they're at least semi-decent quality, if not highly decent quality. However, they are polarized. They are highly polarized and charged in a specific direction, so as to help victims of abuse reclaim their own power. And thus I don't feel like using them as a primary reference point, because eventually that can be overdone and to the point of creating other issues. They may defend the abuser publicly or smear the victim's reputation, all while the narcissist remains in the shadows. Uh, if she has suffered abuse, if he has suffered abuse, if they have suffered abuse, be there for them without abandoning yourself, please. Yeah, a nurturer and a challenger. That combination, supported by a protector, would probably be the best counter to an enabler and an abuser. I want to be this, a nurturer and a challenger. But I've got a ways to go. I'm not exactly starting from the healthiest of places now, am I? Better to admit that and work towards progress than to deny it and be stuck in an endless fiction. That's my personal take.